Hi everyone, welcome back to Speedrun Ragnarok 2020. I'm your host, Scallakitty, and this is actually the first time I've been on camera for a marathon. It's a very new experience. And it also a wonderful and new experience that we have for y'all today. So we have Dr. Rachel Kowert here, who is going to be talking to us about a couple different things. The main sort of topic is talking about the book, The Psychology of Final Fantasy Surpassing the Limit Break, which you were one of the authors in. It's a whole collection
I
of
am.
beautiful essays about Final Fantasy. And knowing our audience, I figured that this would be something that y'all would be interested in. But how about this? Do you want to start telling us a little bit about yourself and about your role it takes take this before we get into the book and other things?
Sure. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm the research director for Take This. I'm a research psychologist. So I've been studying games and gamers for more than 10 years with a specific focus on the social impact of games and the ways that games can impact us physically, socially, and psychologically. I tend to lean more towards looking at the positive effects of games. I am also a huge Final Fantasy fan, my favorite franchise of all time. And when Dr. Bean said he was publishing this book, I basically like put him in a headlock and was like, "You have to let me. Like, I will not take no for an answer. I have to write something for this book." And now it's here, and now it came out, and it's wonderful and great.
Yeah, it's I've had the chance to read through different parts of it. I'm also going to be being a good host and making sure that we have a link there in chat. I will also probably, as we're talking, add it to the bot commands, doing all that sort of background stuff that I'm known for. Um, so this is published through it's geektherapytraining.com. Can you tell us a little bit more about them? Is this your first time working with them?
This is not my first time working with them. I've done a training for them as well. They do trainings if you're a clinician, like continuing education credits for classes associated with cultural competency with all things geek. So
Ooh.
it's like video games, anime, memes. There's a meme one coming up,
There's a
Dungeons
meme?
and Dragons. Yeah, yeah, I know. It's interesting, right? It's like, what are you gonna teach us? I mean, it's about, how to relate with your clients in a more culturally competent way, which is very cool. I'm not a clinician, but if I was a clinician, I would take those courses. They also published The Psychology of Legend of Zelda. I didn't write in that book, but they published that one last year or 2 years ago. And so, yeah, after that came out, everyone was like, so Final Fantasy's next, right?
Oh, of
Like
course.
that's yeah, it's gotta be, right?
There we go. Give me 1 second, making that go live for our wonderful chat. So, chat, you can do exclamation point book in chat. That'll bring up the link to the page where you can find out more about the book
Right.
on geektherapytraining.com. So, so I would actually want to talk about the essay that you wrote, which was storytelling in Final Fantasy, which I
Yes.
loved. It was a really nice essay, and it talked a lot about something that I think maybe not a lot of people have the words for, but have definitely
Mm,
experienced, which is talking about the traditional storytelling method that tends to get see. He short. Hopefully, I did all
yeah.
right.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's better than I can do, I'm gonna say. Yes. No, and the thing that's really interesting about this is, I've played every Final Fantasy except for 15, because now I have two
Ah,
small children. I know, I
you're
want to
breaking
so
my
bad.
heart.
It's in the cellophane. Oh, it's bad. I am playing Final Fantasy VII Remake though. So I mean, I am
Ah,
doing that.
okay. How
So
I
beautiful.
have to ask. I have to ask how far you are, so that way I do not accidentally spoil you.
Not far. I've
Okay.
gotten to the point where I'm taking Tifa on a date
Oh,
at the
okay.
very beginning.
I know where you
Yeah.
are. Okay. Okay. Now
Yeah.
I have to be now like that's gonna be in the back of my head the entire time. Like, be good. Do not spoil
It's
that.
it's okay. It's okay if you do. I mean, I'm really just more fixated on Chadley. I find him to be a very he's
Chadley
memorable.
Chadley is very interesting. I'm a little sad that his story is so locked behind difficult side quests.
Mm,
Um, I ended up like I was like, okay, I saw like how do you find out more about Chadley? And then I saw like
yeah.
the unlock requirements, and I'm like, that's above my pay grade.
I'm not doing that.
Well, to
Yeah.
to be fair, I played the remake on easy mode, but that was because I also marathoned it over the course of like the release
Oh.
weekend, mainly because
Oh.
I wanted to be able to one talk with my friends about it, and two not keep having to avoid all the spoilers like all around the
Yeah.
internets.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I only I started playing it. I'm like 2-3 hours in, and then I realized that it's not even the full game. I didn't even know
No,
that. I
it's
was a
all
little disappointed. I gotta
it is only Midgar.
say. Yeah.
But that's okay. I'm one of the people who I was like, "Yes, give
Is
me
it?
40 hours in
Well,
Midgar."
I mean, I'm fine with that if you also gave me the other 40 hours of the rest of the world.
The
But it's like we waited so long for this remake.
it's the idea is that it's going to be coming out in episodes, and they want to, and now
Yeah.
the rest of the episodes are going to be hopefully coming out in faster production, because there was a lot of
Okay.
stuff. I'm one of those people who keeps up with like the news and everything about all these sorts of things, where there was development that started that had to get restarted. They had to some of it had originally been outsourced. They had to then bring it all back in house.
Oh
Went
wow.
through it went through a whole little development hell cycle, but now it's out.
Yes. Now they have
But
like
it's
the
great.
base so they can just
Yes,
continue to give
yes.
us. Yeah. Anyway, Chadley. Yeah. He's got a monocle and like an ascot. I'm very curious. I think I will I really
Uh,
want to know his story.
Chadley is a good one to want to know a little bit more about. There's a couple other new characters that are very interesting. Some that were imported in from the novel series.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this is like deep lore. There's like two Final Fantasy 7 novels that have been officially released.
Mm,
The new characters in the remake are
yeah.
from the novel The Kids Are All Right, which is an outsider perspective on Final Fantasy 7. All the main
Interesting.
characters are sort of split between half the story is done via the Turks, and then the other half of the story is done via a group of Midgard natives who have been rebuilding their life after meteor fall, and sort of their sort of story and how they end up
Interesting.
getting all sort of looped into what basically becomes Advent Children. It's a prequel to Advent Children. It's a
Oh.
very, very weird book. I enjoyed
Yeah.
it, but I understand it's not for everyone. And then the other book is On the Way to a Smile, which is collection of vignettes talking about
Mm.
what each of the different characters was doing after, in between the end of Final Fantasy 7 and Advent Children. So
Oh, interesting.
it's very
Oh, see, it
interesting.
does sound good.
Um, it's definitely an interesting read. And the person who read it mainly for the extremely strange mini chapters about Sephiroth and Aerith in the live stream.
Hmm.
But I sort of was going to make this joke when we were doing setup, but like when it came to Final Fantasy 7 remake, they had like a big like dartboard about like their target demographic, and some people are out here on the outer ring. They're
But
like
some.
square in the center.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's awesome though. I mean, that's what I live for when the developers, tailor to the
Oh yeah.
center of the
Oh no,
bullseye.
the remake, there are definitely parts of it that are 100% tailored to the center
Yeah.
there.
Oh, that's awesome.
But
That's awesome.
again, I will not spoil you. I'll be good about
No,
that.
don't spoil me.
Because
I did get yeah, I got distracted because I started watching The Witcher. That's different, but I'm getting back to it now. I'm getting back to Final Fantasy now. So yeah, so hopefully I'll be more than 3 hours in next time
yay,
we talk.
yay. I'll do one last thing. The one main
Yeah.
reason why I want everyone to experience that unspoiled as much as possible is to make sure, because it gave me the one thing I never thought I would be able to have again, which is the ability to re-experience one of my favorite stories
Mhm.
and kind of not know what was going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Anyway,
That's nice.
so let's actually talk a little bit about
Yes. Going back, that was a side note, but it's still Final Fantasy related. It's on
Final
point.
Fantasy related.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
yeah.
know. Go ahead if you had.
Well, I was just gonna say, so we were talking about the storytelling,
Yes.
and when I wrote this chapter, I didn't know what I wanted to write about when I told Tony, like I forced my writing upon him. Um, and then I started thinking, let's get back to the basics. What is it that I love about Final Fantasy? I love the story. I love the characters. I feel very attached to the characters. I feel very attached to the way that they interact with each other. And when I started doing research to write it, I realized I realized there's actually this is a special story structure unique to Eastern storytelling that we don't traditionally see in Western RPGs, and I found that so fascinating. So in Western developed role playing games like Skyrim is the example I give in the chapter.
Hmm.
You meet the hero, you figure out what the main conflict is in the very beginning, and the rest of the story is about solving it. So in Skyrim, you find out there's a world eater dragon, you need to kill it, and the rest of the story is about finding it and killing it. Well,
Right.
in Final Fantasy 6, which is my go-to example because it's the best and I will die on that hill. Um, you meet so many characters before you realize how they're related,
Mm.
before you realize what um, the main boss battle is going to be. Like you meet like half the party, and then the game you're 50 hours in, then you meet like another half of the party, and it's really a unique it's not unique to Final Fantasy, it's unique to Eastern
Mm.
storytelling, but Final Fantasy does it beautifully in
Yeah,
every
like in every way.
yeah.
Um, yeah, like what you're talking about, like sort of setting up the conflict comes a lot later in the game that you sort of expect. There's a lot of that sort that you see a lot, I think, in Final Fantasy, where there's sort of like the initial conflict setup, and then there will be the like actual greater scope things that are going on. Because especially, and this is one of those things where unfortunately release order, I feel, kind of dampened the effect because in Japan you had 4, 5, 6,
Yes,
and
right.
obviously in the US we skipped over 5 completely.
Yeah.
Though I'll tell my favorite side story. 5 was almost released in the US, and if it had been, it would have been Final Fantasy Extreme, and that's what its name in
Wow.
my heart.
Oh, wow. I love it. I
Because
love it.
they did it out of order. They had to give it some weird name. Thank you, Ted
Right,
Woosley, for that fact.
that's
Um,
great.
but anyway, but when you sort of first encounter Kefka, if you've played through the series, he feels very much like a Gilgamesh kind of character at first. You're sort of expecting him to stay in that sort of villainous
Mhm.
comic relief role. And then it's sort of the reveal kind of as we go that Kefka is the actual greater scope villain.
Right,
And that's an
right.
interesting, like I said, that is the sort of like the we talk about it. So in the Kisho Tenketsu, that's the 10, the twist part of it, correct?
Yes, exactly. So
Yeah.
there's four parts to the structure. There's the introduction where you meet the characters. Then there's development where you extend upon meeting the characters. So this is already kind of drawn out, compared to Western storytelling where it's like explosion, action,
Right, right, right.
conflict, like all this stuff happens at the beginning. Then you have the twist. And the twist, it takes you into a seemingly separate direction, but really it's not. It's taking you towards the conclusion, which is the fourth act. And I saw that Dr. B mentioned, the opera scene. The
Yeah.
opera scene is not critical like it's not critical
Mm.
to the story, but it is like the best scene in the entire game.
Oh,
And having
yeah.
this kind of storytelling allows for that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is always in a lot of Final Fantasy games there's some amount of breathing room. That's
Yeah.
and I think that's become more and more apparent as things have gone on. One of the things I usually tell people, again, I hope you get the chance to play Final Fantasy 15. I'm one of the
Well,
people
I will.
who is diehard Final Fantasy 15. But one of the things I tell people when I find out that they're playing it for the first time, I'm like, take your time with it, do your side quests. Because a
Mhm.
lot of that gives you more insight to the world, gives you
Mhm.
more of the chance to sort of settle in and settle down with the party, because I feel a lot of Final Fantasy 15's enjoyment depends upon how much do you like the central four characters,
Mhm.
and if
Mhm.
and especially the relationships between them, which we kind of talked about.
Yeah, that's what really is key to these stories is
Mm.
the relationships between the characters. And the fact that you can relate to them and the fact that
Oh
they're
yeah.
flawed and like broody cloud is gonna brood and that's what we like about them, right?
I have thoughts about Cloud Strife. But actually, one of the people who I feel had the best sort of quote about this is actually Brianna White, who is Aerith's current voice actress as of the
Mhm.
remake. I believe this was in a. I had the quote. I think it was in a interview with like Kotaku. But basically, she sort of summed it up this way. She said, one of the things that's true in so many good Final Fantasy games is the connection between characters. And you
Mm,
really see it. I've seen it in Final Fantasy 14 and in Final Fantasy 15. But there's something
mhm,
about the way Final Fantasy makes a character that makes you fall in love with them. But also, they fall in love with each other and have special bonds with each other. So, that I think is sort of the real keys, that there are a lot of characters in Final Fantasy who are like that level of lovable. Even if they are, my partner Oren often describes the a lot of the villains as being sort of like very charismatic, very magnetic, and even if you don't agree at all with what they're doing, you still are drawn to them and to their stories because their stories are just as complex as the
mhm,
heroes are in often.
mhm, like Sephiroth. I
Trust.
mean, yeah, yeah.
Wait, my boy.
There you go, there you go. Yeah. I mean, you feel for them, and,
Oh
I
yeah.
have there's a line, in the chapter where I said, "Final Fantasy has created game spaces where the players become psychologically invested to the success of their allies," and that's how you feel. It draws you in like, "I
Oh yeah.
must save them. I
Yeah.
must defeat the
Um,
enemy."
I mean, this is kind of sort of spoiler alert, but
Oh, for me or
for no, I mean, basically,
no.
do you know about the prequel game to Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core?
Yes.
Okay, great. Which is the whole sort of premise of Crisis Core is that if you've played the original Final Fantasy VII, you know that it's a story about Zack, and one of the major
Mhm,
plot points is that Zack dies protecting Cloud.
mhm,
And the game starts with that concept in mind, and it then becomes this sort of very interesting thing. How do you create a game where there is a doomed hero and everyone playing it knows that he's doomed, and how do you
mhm,
create that connection between you the player and Zack the character?
mhm.
And it's just one of these things where I feel that's definitely something that is really well done. Ooh, and actually, hey, we do have some questions.
Alright.
I'm gonna
We
do
can
my
keep
best to read this out from chat. This is from Racodactylus.
mhm.
Does the effectiveness of Final Fantasy storytelling rest, at least partially, on the ability of fictional narratives to allow us to explore, in safe ways because it's fictive,
Mm.
very salient and intense topics, whether personal or impersonal, and see how characters that we may resonate with respond to those topics? That's an excellent question.
1000%. 1000%. And, books can do something very similar as well when there's a character that you relate to, that you see yourself in, and they go through something that resonates with you. But games do it in a way that is more visceral because
Mm.
you are controlling the character and you are interacting with the character. And
Oh, yeah.
the link to geek therapy training, they talk a lot about this in a lot of the trainings they do about when you're working with clients. You say, which game characters do you resonate with? And you talk about how those heroes or those villains or those journeys relate to your everyday life and how you can use those
Ooh.
for interpersonal growth. And I was talking with Scala earlier about a different book called Video Games and Wellbeing that was published earlier this year. But there's a chapter in it on games and resilience and how we learn resilience. And a fantastic example of that are the narratives of Final Fantasy IV. And by playing through them and experiencing them, we
Okay.
too are learning the lessons about interpersonal growth and emotional resilience. And actually, Dr. B wrote that chapter and he's in the chat. So props to him because it's a great chapter.
Also, because I'm very fast at the Googles, there we go.
Oh my gosh, you are really fast. But Dr. B goes, it's a good chapter. Yeah,
It is
we
a
know
good
it is
chapter.
because you wrote it. Yes.
No, that is
Great question. And
no,
it's
it's a
absolutely,
fantastic
yeah.
question, and definitely I feel finding the characters that you resonate with, sometimes it might surprise you what they end up being.
Hmm.
I'll just do a very short thing. Like, obviously, online, I go by Scala, from the Princess and Chrono Trigger, and that name was originally just like a joke that I picked up. My brother and I joined a gaming forum together. He's my younger brother. He's like, "Oh, I want to be like Magus or Janus from Chrono Trigger," and I'm like, "Well,
Hmm.
I'm your older sister. I have to be Scala then," because I thought that was cute and funny. But
Right.
then, like, in replaying Chrono Trigger after it came out on the DS, I was just like, "Oh." Oh, I get this now, and
I
she
am
has.
Scala.
Well, because I feel I definitely resonate with her probably more than I ever expected, like, playing it again when I was older, because I could see more of, like, her personality and her struggle. Like, even though you see her in only, like, short little glimpses, it's
Mm,
enough to let you know, like, okay, this is someone who cares very deeply, who wants, people to be treated, like, all with respect, all equally,
mm,
and who works very hard at this, but at the same time is sort of having to deal with a whole bunch of other like issues, some of which are that she is like party to, and some of which she has no control over.
mhm,
And it's just interesting to sort of see like that story. And yeah, whatever. I'll be a little like vulnerable here. Um a lot of people in my family struggle with mental health,
mhm,
and that's sort of, and so I kind of get her, like, she's trying
mhm,
really really hard to be this protector, this like emotional like rock in her family that is torn apart by something that is sort of big and
mhm.
scary.
Yeah.
And and um and she and like I said, even though within, the story of Chrono Trigger itself, she maybe not doesn't quite succeed, she was trying the entire time, and she
Mhm,
was a lot stronger, I think, than anyone ever gave her credit for.
mhm. Absolutely. That was really brave of you to share.
Oh,
Thank you
thank
for sharing
you.
that. But it's these characters, like for me, Final Fantasy VI, Celis is
Yes.
my
Oh.
girl. She's my girl. And there's everybody you ask would have a different answer about who is that
Hmm.
character that really resonates with them. And it is kind of like a projective, like Rorschach test, like which character resonates
Oh.
with you, right? Because there's something different about someone who resonates with Celis versus someone who resonates with Terra. They have totally different
Oh, yeah.
backgrounds. Yeah.
That is totally, totally a different, like,
Yeah.
vibe that Terra
Right.
has than Celis has,
Yeah.
which are both fantastic.
Yes,
Um,
of course.
Actually, we could talk, a little bit, I know the other part of your chapter was about, women in Final Fantasy.
Yes.
Yes, female
Yes.
characters in Final Fantasy, so we could totally, talk about that too.
We should, because Final
Yes.
Fantasy was way ahead of the game in terms of strong, competent female leaders. I mean, even now, female characters tend to be, they're getting better. They are getting better, admittedly, but majority of characters are still tropey, scantily clad. There was
Mhm.
a study that came out, I think it was 2000 and I want to say 14. I could be totally wrong. That still found that 68% of all female characters are bystanders or props, right? But Final
Right.
Fantasy back in the early 90s, late 80s had, strong, competent. And in Final Fantasy 2, you have the twins and they're girl
Oh,
children who are very
oh,
strong and powerful.
Porum and Palom are a boy and a girl.
Oh, were they a boy and a girl? Okay. Well,
Yes.
one is a girl. I thought they were
Uh,
girls.
no, no, Palom is the sort of snarky, kind of playful one, and then, Porum is the more mature of the 2. But yeah, no, they are a brother and sister.
Okay.
But
Thank you for clarifying.
no problem, no problem, trust me, I have
Yeah.
many thoughts about the ladies of Final Fantasy IV.
Yeah, right, right. I mean, and it's pretty incredible. I mean, in the East, they did have female empresses and female queens and things long before. Like, we still don't have female leaders in America, like not president.
Right.
But yes, I love the way that women are portrayed, and they were always portrayed as competent and strong in their own right without needing another male character to come and save them.
Right.
They could hold their own.
Right. Um, I feel that you see a lot of sort of the beginning tropes as early as Final Fantasy like 2 Japan, the original Final
Mm,
Fantasy 2, where at the very beginning you're sort of like you're introduced like to your first two female characters, like basically in Final Fantasy, because in Final Fantasy 1 there's no like real gender assignment to the party. Um
mm,
and like there's only like sort of like one major female character. Oh, there's two major female characters in Final Fantasy 1. You got Sarah, you got Matoya. Matoya being the better choice. But in Final Fantasy 2, you have Maria, Hilda, and Layla, who are all very different characters. And I love Hilda actually a lot, because they sort of, like I said, they have like this sort of, again, a princess character,
Mhm.
but Hilda from like pretty much the very beginning is the one in charge. She's the
Right.
one you go and talk to get your quest. She's the one sending you out there. And while you do have to still end up rescuing her, it's it is it sort of implies that that would have happened to any leader. It wasn't
Mhm.
because she was the princess. It was because
Mhm.
she is the leader of the rebels, and that's
Right.
why she got captured. And I actually like Maria's story a lot too, as someone who, like, her story is not even like a romantic story. Her story is entirely I want my family back. Is like sort of
Mhm.
Maria's story. I'm like one of the very rare people who really liked Final Fantasy 2. And
They're all
they're
good. I
all
mean,
good.
they're all good.
I like it too because I think it's a good message for right now. Because Final Fantasy 2, there's no big prophecy, there's no magical crystals in that one. It is literally just a group of people who see that the world is dealing with lots of oppression, with lots of disasters, with just a lot of negativity, and they sort of say, it ends with me, it stops with me, I'm fixing it. And I think even though that's sort of a kind of a classic message, I think especially like nowadays, even for a game that was released back in the 80s, I still
Mhm.
think it's a really good and powerful message.
Mhm. Absolutely. They're timeless, these games. They really
Absolutely.
are. Yeah.
And I'm going to chat. If you could actually do me a super okay, good. Rakodaklis also had an additional question because
Oh, let's hear it. And don't
being
have to be
awesome.
sorry. I see and apologize. You
Yes.
don't have to apologize. You ask all
Okay.
the questions. We'll answer all the
Okay.
questions.
Doesn't the Final Fantasy series have a problem with representation of female characters as conforming to the three faces of Eve tropes, the
Mm.
caregiver, the seductress, and the child? Yeah, even though they were still ahead of the game in terms of showing strong female characters, had they really gone beyond how they've always treated women and girl characters?
I mean, I do think they have because their female characters have a lot more agency than you see in other franchises. They are able to choose their own path. They are not beholden to anyone. Of course, there are some exceptions. I mean, okay, Fran was independent-ish, but she also was very scantily clad, right, in Final Fantasy 12. So they're not. I would say they're not perfect,
Mm,
but in terms of, the industry catching up to females being able to carry their own story, I mean,
mm,
they are only just now catching up. I mean, there's Laura Croft, okay? She was over sexualized, to be sure. She did
mhm.
also carry her own story though. But that was like literally the only example until like recently with like Ellie in The Last of Us and these other games.
I definitely feel in general with Square, you definitely had some of that. Oh, I cannot remember her name. I think it's Elias, I think is her name. The character in Saga Frontier, who had a very interesting she's the half mystic. I have to like type into Google, like, Google, please tell me what the name of this character was because I can't remember my 90s RPGs. Um Chat if you know. Sorry. Uh, oh god, this
Acellus?
Acellus. Thank y'all. Yes, Acellus.
Chat. Good job,
Good
chat.
job, chat. Um, though her narrative goes in like a real different direction than you would have expected in the 90s, and one of the endings is she ends up being a lesbian vampire queen, basically.
Oh, well, that sounds pretty. I mean, again, ahead of its time,
Ahead
I
of
would
its
say.
time.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we got a couple more questions coming in. Okay,
Mm.
so thank you, chat, for highlighting them so we can see them a little easier. So we have from Drumboardist thoughts on Tara's growth as a character and as a person in the party. The fact that she drops off as the de facto main character in the world of Ruin.
Exactly, and that's part of the storytelling, right? It's kind of a twist because then the whole party goes off to find Tara, which is completely tangential,
Right.
not really, but I mean to finding Kefka. And that's what makes, I think, the story part of the reason this story and these characters were so invested in them because we're completely like, oh, Kefka might destroy the world, but that doesn't matter
Mm.
because Tara flew up and we have to go find
Oh
her and
yeah,
she's part of our party and we love her.
exactly.
Um, Tara is such a good allegory. I love her transformation. I love that she doesn't know how to control it. I love that she is ashamed slash embarrassed slash just leaves her friends, but then they go and they find her and they show her love and she returns to them. And her story is really beautiful. And I think that her leaving is one of the big hooks in the story.
That's good. I mean, I definitely something that I've sort of so full disclosure for people who don't know me, earlier this year I had the chance to be a part of the Edge Case Collective's first marathon where they allowed people to do put on panels about games, and I originally had pitched a panel about the queer themes in Final Fantasy.
Mm.
And while I had to eventually cut it down because of time, and also because I can talk about queer themes in Final Fantasy VII for 2 hours apparently. I actually had wanted to talk about Terra, because I know a lot of people saw, like, a lot of queer allegories with her,
Hmm.
which my obviously, first things first, this is a personal interpretation. Everyone is totally cool to interpret characters however they please. I tend to interpret her as asexual, and that I
Mm.
feel kind of like the way that she has a lot of questions about what exactly is love, her concepts about, like, okay, like Edgar is like flirting with me, but I am not reacting. I think a normal girl would, and sort of this like there's definitely a queer narrative in there, I feel, and there's definitely a couple different ways to interpret it, but I definitely on the side of Tara's probably ace, and it's really great that she sort of finds her way of expressing love through family, through protecting community, and that in the story that's treated as just as valid as anyone
Mhm.
else's.
Of course, that's really I've never heard that before, and this is why I love the characters of Final Fantasy,
Absolutely.
because they're so nuanced and multi-layered, and you see different and now next
Oh,
time I play it, I'm probably gonna notice I'm probably gonna notice it, right?
oh yeah.
Very That's so cool.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Trust me, I again, this is more like stuff I talked about in my panel. Like, I'm someone for who Final Fantasy was a lens that helped me kind of
Mhm,
come to terms with being a queer person,
mhm.
and it was how I met my eventual partner, Oren. We both met through our love of Final Fantasy,
Very cool.
and because of that, it's like it will always have a special place in my heart. Also, Dravenheart, keeping me honest, our one of our wonderful volunteers, Mead's Streams, did have a question for us from
Yes,
Twitter.
yes.
How did you decide where to start in analyzing Final Fantasy? There's a lot of subject matter to tackle.
Oh my goodness, there is, and you know when the book eventually came out, because I didn't see the other chapters, I was actually like, wow, there is a lot of subject matter, and the chapters went in so many different directions that was unexpected. I wanted to start at what the root of the love of the stories were for me, and the root of it
Yes.
is the stories.
Oh, absolutely.
Um, and so yeah, and so that's so I just thought, what's base level? Um, that information that I can get that other people can build upon, because a lot of the other chapters are about examining specific narratives and specific games, whereas my chapter is more like overarching, kind
Yeah.
of looking at the idea of Final Fantasy and why it's so special. Because I love all RPGs, I love all JRPGs, but there's something different about Final Fantasy, and I was like, what is it? I need to
But
know.
Final Fantasy just hits different.
It just does. It just does. That's a perfect way of saying it. It's the quote of the evening. Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Thank you. Um, let's see. I'm going to make sure that in chat I have scrolled back, make sure I have not missed anyone's wonderful questions. And again, if you would like to, oh, I see. When we're talking about different characters, I see Asuka calling out Ferris, one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters.
Yes.
I have a lot of
Yes.
love for Ferris, and I think Ferris. Whether or not you want to claim Ferris as probably the first, like, 100%, yeah, you could probably say Ferris is queer Final Fantasy character. I'm going to say it. I don't care. There's a lot going on there with Ferris, and but Ferris also kind of plays into a bit of the sort of what Raka was getting at. Um what I've sort of I have this sort of theory that as sort of like a watered down sort of like family friendly version of sort of the whore Madonna complex, you have
Mm.
Princess Pirate.
Mm.
where like
Yeah.
that's sort of like that's a theme that you see not just in Final Fantasy. You see it like, for example, with like Tetra and Zelda
That's
in
exactly what
Wind
I was thinking
Waker.
when you said that. Yes, that is exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Whereas it's that sort of dichotomy, and you see that with like I said, Ferris is the perfect like example where you have Ferris and then you have um Lena, and of course the whole reveal that Ferris is actually a princess, and then they have the whole
Mhm.
thing where Ferris has to get dressed up, and then later on it's just like, nah, this ain't for me. I'm a pirate.
Right, right.
Pirate is just my style, and it's
That's so
that
funny.
sort of Ferris embracing a lot of and again, what interpretation you want to do for Ferris is going to depend on your own personal, thing. I like gender fluid Ferris. This is one of the things where I wish I could like sit down. Oh, well, we're talking women in Final Fantasy. Let's talk about my favorite, my favorite women involved in Final Fantasy, Shibuya Kazuko. Her name might not be super duper familiar to a lot of people, but you know her work, you love her work. She was the lead, one of the lead graphic designers of Final Fantasy. If you love the way
Mm.
Final Fantasy 1 looks, that was all Shibuya Kazuko. And she worked on 2, 3. She unfortunately had to skip over 4 because she was busy helping to start the Mana series. But 5 and
Oh, wow.
6, like with 5 and 6, she was mainly the character, like the little character sprite designer, and
Mm.
she personally designed for Final Fantasy 5 every single job class in that game for
Oh,
every
wow.
character. And so
Wow.
I would always love to just like sit down with her and like tell me like how you came up with all these different designs, because each one is tailored to the character. They're not just generic. And it's just such an interesting story. She does have a book out called FF Dot is the name of the
Mm.
book, which I definitely would love to get,
Yeah.
because she just has like this wonderful amount of influence, and so that's why definitely when like talk about women in Final Fantasy comes up, I always bring up Shibuya Kazuko because
I
she's
mean,
sort of this unsung hero. I feel like in the whole series. Like for example, my favorite thing is like, do you like Terra with green hair? Do you like think she looks better with green hair? You can thank Shibuya
yeah,
Kazuko. That was her
right.
design decision.
Right. But see, this is a really great point because the women of Final Fantasy, it's not just in front of the
Yes.
camera, right? But
Yes.
also behind the camera and within their infrastructure as a company. And that's probably why they were so ahead of their time.
Yes. Okay, so we got some more questions from chat. I do have to keep an eye also on our clock. I believe we have until I have to go and do math. Okay, great. We have basically another like 10 minutes or so before we have to start
All
getting
right, let's
set up
answer these questions.
for Final Fantasy VII, which by the way, I
Yes.
will tell you, if you've never seen the Final Fantasy VII PC any percent route, stick around for you, especially Dr. Kowert, because it's a very, very different experience. You want to see us beat that game in
Oh,
like 2-ish hours?
wow.
It
Wow.
it it
That's
it
bananas.
it involves a lot of wiggling, is the long and the short of
I,
it.
it's funny.
So we got a question from Little526. Just got here,
Yes.
and I don't know if it's been covered, but thoughts on FF10 actually having Yuna
Mhm.
as the main character and Titus just being the lens through which the player experiences the story.
Love it. Love it. I mean,
Yeah.
in Yuna as the main playable character, I'm trying to think because 9 it was a guy, and 8 it was a guy, and 7 it was a guy, and 6 was more ensemble, I suppose. So I mean, it was among the first in which she was the
Mm.
main character. She was. I mean, I didn't like that she was a sacrifice, and that seemed kind of like inevitable.
I mean, trust me, we can have a whole conversation about that in Final Fantasy. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, but I did like that Yuna was the main character. And I actually am maybe one of the few who liked X2, where you had the three girls as the main characters as well. I love the women of Final Fantasy X. I love Riku so much. And Lulu, she's so I don't know, emo. I don't know what the word is. I love her. I love her outfit. I love her snarkiness. She's wonderful. But yes, thumbs up from me for Yuna for 10.
Also, sort of building off of that, who is your favorite female Final Fantasy character and why? And which character do you
Oh.
feel has the most depth in the series? And who
Oh,
is your least favorite, or who do you find to be most polarizing? Wow, that's a whole bunch.
that's a
All
lot of questions. Okay. My favorite is Celis
okay,
from
good
6.
choice.
I just I don't know. I think I just resonate with her story. She wants to do what's right. She's not really sure. She has these allies, but she, feels like an allegiance to the Kafka's army. Um, I just love her. I could just sit in that mood for a minute. She's my favorite. The most polarizing, I found that there was a lot of hate for Riku based
Hmm.
exclusively on her clothing because her personality is delightful. And she's like the rogue with she punches you in the
Yeah.
face with like her hands. Like she's awesome. Like I don't know what's not to like about Riku. Um I feel like she did cause a little bit of what's the word? People didn't
Discourse?
like her.
Oh.
Discord. Discord and discourse. Um for sure. But I love her and I want to cosplay her one day. I think she's great.
Oh, that'd be super fun.
Right? It would be.
I'll answer the question too. Like I said, I have a lot of love for Ferris. Probably Rydia though, from Final
Mm.
Fantasy IV.
Yours Dr.
Just be
B. Yeah,
yes,
he's with
just
you.
well, just because of very quickly. Yeah, I Final Fantasy IV was basically my bedtime stories, like in the
Mhm.
early '90s. That
Mm.
to let you gauge roughly how old I am. And, like, imagine being like a little kid who's sort of been watching, like, your mom play Final Fantasy. That was all the other big thing in my family is that my mom was the one who played Final Fantasy.
Very
So,
cool.
it was a bonding experience with my mom. And then you see like, oh, there's like this cute like girl character and she's got like cool green hair. That's super cool. And then it turns out, you get like later and she comes back and she's all like super cool and super powerful and like little like baby me was just like, oh, that's such a cool like power fantasy.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
had a lot of love for Rydia. Which is my least favorite character? Oh,
Mm.
oh no, oh no, oh no.
I didn't answer that if you noticed.
I know
That's
you did
surprising.
answer that. um It's Kafka, but it's, like, in a very weird way, it's Kafka. I like a lot of stuff that people do with Kafka, but I really, really dislike the Kafka versus Sephiroth,
Well,
like, debate that rages on.
here's the thing with Kafka, bringing
Yes.
it back to Take This, because
Yes.
we're here about
Okay.
Take This. Kafka is a terrible representation of mental health in
Oh,
video games.
yeah. Absolutely.
Because Kefka's like, he's bad because he's crazy, and
Yeah.
that's all you got. That's like his whole storyline. At least
Yes!
Sephiroth, he's got drama. He's got,
Yes!
reasons for
Yes!
acting the
Yes!
way he does. Yeah.
Yeah. Trust
Kefka is like my go-to bad example of mental health representation in games.
Thank you. Thank you for getting at some of what I get at with, like, the
Yeah.
whole thing. I think
Yeah.
they're like I said, I think that there's definitely he definitely has some of the best dialogue. I definitely like when they allow him to sort of satirize like, this is sort of like Kefka in the crossovers tends to be the satirist of the series, where there'll be stuff like, he'll like he'll make comments about the other ones. He's like, "Oh, that's just another person. That's another sadist with a god complex. We got enough of those guys around here." And I'm like, "Okay, that's actually like an interesting way to use his character." But
Mhm.
yeah, like you said, like I don't know, like Kefka just feels so cardboard thin. And
'Cause
then
he
I'm over
is.
here. Yeah, he is. And then I
He's what
have
we call one-dimensional.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then I'm over here with like I'm like, yes, please give me Sephiroth's like incredible like what corruption arc.
Right.
Because that's a
Right.
very interesting dynamic of someone who was sort of lifted up like as high as you could kind of go on a pedestal, and then that pedestal was sort of like knocked out from under him. And
Mm.
it was like it wasn't just like this sort of quick motion if you play Crisis Core. It's like a slow, steady chipping away at it. And it makes you
Mm.
be like, yeah, yeah, you know what? Shinra, really bad. You know what? If I was in that situation, yeah, maybe I would have done something dramatic. Probably just like shaved my head, not like burn down a village, but
Right.
you know.
Yeah. Yep. They're saying Kefka is like the joke. Kefka, actually, I like Kefka as a villain. I think because six was my bedtime story, right? So
Right.
it's very nostalgic, and nostalgia with video games is like it's a special thing in our hearts. But he's just a bad representation of mental health, and he's just has no reason for doing what he's doing except he's insane.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, you could have a whole big thing about FF6 as an example of a sort of writing style called hope punk, where
Mm.
you sort of set where even if the story is a dystopian story, it still has to kind of deal with hope as the overarching like guiding light, which
Mhm.
even like is like the light of hope is like one of like the key words that gets brought up like early on in the story.
Mhm.
And for that you need a villain that sort of represents that, and Kefka as this example of sort of like almost like nihilism personified, the nothing in
Mhm.
life matters kind of
Yeah.
version of
Yeah.
nihilism. Like
Yeah.
that sort of is a thematically appropriate villain for that, for someone
Yeah.
who doesn't care at all about anyone else but himself, but his own personal delight in um like torturing others, and then
Mhm.
to have the counterweight against that being a party that is based around an ensemble cast who has all come together, even though they might not all agree on everything, even though they come from like different roles, different personalities, that that sort of ability to form like strong relationships and strong bonds and find meaning in even the harshest like type of existence, thematically
Mhm.
positioning that against a very nihilistic villain like makes sense.
Oh, existentialism. Yes.
Yes, hope punk,
Yes.
definitely go look up hope punk
Yes.
as a concept. It is fantastic, and Final Fantasy 6 is an excellent example of it.
Mhm.
I do believe that might be the end of our time. I'm going to ask, is there any one last very quick question from the chat? I'm sorry we completely derailed there, but we had a good conversation, so it's okay.
We did have a good conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation.
Yes.
I mean, I love talking about psychology and Final Fantasy
Oh,
and obviously mental health, and it's conversations we don't get to have very often. So thank you for hosting me
oh,
and
well,
having
one of
me.
the things we sort of have brought up is that, for, a lot of times Take This has been able to go around to different conventions and put on panels, which are fantastic. I've gotten the chance when I was able to go around to conventions and volunteer. I also did my best to go to some of the different panels y'all put on, and they were really fantastic. I really
You.
liked the one I got to go to at PAX East. It was the one on Sunday. I'm trying to remember, which is about I think diversity in gaming communities.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one was really, really good and really fantastic. And obviously, that kind of can't happen right now. So we were really excited to go and to bring you all here to our marathon and kind of allow people the chance to get to see and know y'all this way. One thing I'm
Yeah.
trying to please spell your YouTube channel for me so I can definitely let people know where to find you for more stuff.
Oh, yes. It's Psychgeist.
Thank you. Thank you.
Psych Geist. Yes, I publish weekly videos on the science of games. There is one on science psychology of Final Fantasy, and today I published one on girl gamers, which we all know how we feel about that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
as a collective of female and femme leaning
Yeah.
gamers, we might.
You'll like this video. You'll like this video. I promise you should check
Okay, here, and let me go ahead
it.
and pull that up in chat so you can go and see more. There we go. But thank
Thank you.
you so, so much for
Thank
this
you for
wonderful
having me.
conversation. I know I was super excited to have the chance, especially when we got told we could have more time together. I
Yeah,
was
I
very
know. You like, "You
excited.
want more time?" I want all the time.
All the
All the time.
time.
Yeah. But
But
now we get to do speed runs, so
yes,
that's exciting.
so I want all y'all to stick around for it's going to be Final Fantasy VII PC Any Percent Race. So we're going to have both Couch 23 and Natara racing Final Fantasy VII PC Any Percent. If you've never seen this run, especially if you haven't seen this run recently, it's gotten itself a big update. It is it is amazing what we can make games do. Let's just say that if you love glitchy speed runs, and if you love glitchy RPG speedruns in particular, and if you want to see Final Fantasy VII in a way you probably haven't before, I definitely recommend sticking around. I will be your host for that one, and we're going to be bringing back the classic $7 donation incentive. Basically, donate $7 to any of our other incentives, and you also will get a fact about Final Fantasy VII from me.
Ah, very
It,
cool.
it
And you've read the books, so
yes,
I feel like you are the
I
one
I
to have this knowledge.
I read the books. I used to work as a fan translator for the Lifestream.net and was one of the people who tried to put together a comprehensive timeline of Final Fantasy VII, which is harder than you expect because a lot of it is vague. But
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
But thank you again for coming by,
Thank you.
Dr. Cowart, and just having this wonderful conversation with us, with me, with chat. Y'all have been fantastic. Let's keep raising more money for Take This, especially so that way, once they're able to travel around again, they might be able to come to a convention near you, or you might be able to go to a convention where they are, and you can have more of these wonderful panels. So thank you all so, so much. We're going to go ahead, go over to setup, and y'all can just chill with the music in the meanwhile.